You're really not human anymore. You've lost all that. Or you're only there now to kill the enemy. That's all you're there for, right? And you're going to die to do it. And you accepted that. I was in the Army, of course. I'm proud of it. I was in the artillery. I took my basic training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the 82nd Airborne.
Ralph received extensive combat training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, from May 30th, 1944 until early December 1944, mainly in artillery weaponry and communications, including pole wiring between gun locations and headquarters, flag signaling, and telephone switchboards.
War was already 3 or 4 years old, so I was trained to do anything in any area that the artillery required. I was pretty good at shorthand and typing because I wanted to take a business course, and the Morse code, I was prepared. So when I did join my unit that was already formed for 5 years before that, I could walk into any position that I was there basically for the people who got killed. That's why we were there, right, to replace them.
Ralph grew up in Hyde Park, New York, on a 20-acre farm near Statsburg High School. He had 11 siblings, 3 of whom were also drafted.
Because I was drafted, I wasn't allowed to finish high school with my class. But after I was in a while and everything, I realized that it was more important for me for those 2 weeks to be in training than it was at graduating. The case of war, that comes first. I think people should realize that. There were things that you didn't want to do, but you did.
From Fort Bragg, Ralph's unit was transferred to a port of embarkation at Fort Meade, Maryland. It was at this time the German armies had broken through U.S. lines all along the Rhine River. 2 weeks before Christmas, Ralph was allowed to go home to visit his family, but he would soon find out some very upsetting news.
The following week was Christmas, and no way they were going to keep us from Christmas. Yeah, that's what you thought. We boarded the train 3 o'clock in the morning at Fort Meade, day before Christmas. Battle of the Bulge was only about, at that time, only a week old, so we had no idea where we were headed. And they boarded up all the windows, and they locked all the doors to all the cars, so we couldn't go from car to car. That was so we didn't take a little piece of paper or drop a message out the window that I think we're going to go, I think we're leaving to go to Europe. The military didn't want, in no way, they didn't want to know that that ship was going to leave, and it left on Christmas Eve. And then we got thinking, well, maybe the reason it left on Christmas Eve is because the Germans figured, no way, Americans are going to send 6,000 guys out on Christmas Eve. They're going to send them home. Well, that's where we were wrong. They did send them, but we got there safe.
The men boarded an English troop carrier in complete darkness. The last people they talked to on land were members of the Salvation Army, who gave each soldier a leather-bound Bible, which Ralph still has to this day. The boat zigzagged through the North Atlantic to avoid German submarines, and the soldiers slept in hammocks on the ship.
So you got 6,100 guys at seasick, homesick, hungry, afraid. There was more guys standing on deck, throwing up over into the ocean than there was inside. It was a mess. When we finally got to Scotland, we boarded trains and went down to Southampton on New Year's Day, okay? And it was a snowstorm and the wind was blowing 30, 40 miles an hour. You were asked to get off of this ship that had no roof on it. You were freezing, your nose, you're freezing. In 18 inches of water. By the time you walked the mile up the hill to camp, you're from here on, you were just ice. Now when you get up there, they don't have no stoves, no dryers, no nothing. You just hold the clothes over a fire. They took those tubs and they filled them with gasoline. Then they set the gasoline afire. 4,000 or 5,000 guys standing around, all waiting for turns to put their underwear and put their pants over the fire. stayed up all night trying to get our shoes dry. If we wanted hot water to wash or something, you know, we took the snow and put it in our helmets. Then we put the helmets on top of the engine of the Jeep. And sometimes we had to wash out the helmet because we used the helmet to wash our socks with. The following morning, we boarded that railroad car. It's for pigs and chickens and cows and stuff like that. And they were called 40 and 8s, 40 men or 8 horses. And while we were going, the snow came up through the sides and up through the bottom, so we stuffed the hay into the cracks of the thing. After that, I had my orders. I was going to the Colmar pocket. And the reason we're there is because the 575 had a gun big enough to blow up the bridges. And the French didn't have it. There we had to go in the middle of the night to get by the enemies, right? But our guns was the great big 240 millimeters. The barrels as long as these 2 rooms. We were able to destroy the bridges and 2 or 3 of the cities down there. I was invited to get the Legion of Honor from the French government. Because we blew up the bridges, we stopped the Germans coming in, and by that, they were able to go on with the war. For the next 2 months, 2.5 months, that was basically our job, blowing out bridges. And the last 2 weeks of the war, we were instructed to don't blow out any more bridges, save our ammunition, and concentrate on field dumps. And as a rate of that, they had no way of getting the gas into the front lines anymore, the Germans. When the war was over, there were just thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment, German equipment. That was nothing wrong with them, just put gas in them, drove them away. But the Germans had everything. Oh, I've seen the infantry guys, they took the bed sheets, you know, and the body bags and put holes in them for their eyes, right? And that's what we used out in the snow. But the Germans had great big white helmets, white masks, white everything. They even had kitchens sometimes. We didn't have kitchens.
The winter of 1944 to 1945 was one of the coldest on record. During this time, Ralph was responsible for scouting out locations to move the guns. He recounts a horrifying experience that sticks with him today.
5 of us. Our detail was to go through enemy lines and decide where we're going to set up our guns. And we was going through the woods because the Battle of Bulge was, the Ardennes Forest was fought in the woods, basically. So they must have seen us go, and they didn't do anything. They put up a wire across the road that we went up on because they knew we were coming back, right? And we hit it. And the Jeep went about 15 feet up in the air when it came down. The driver and I, we went to the hospital. I still have burns on my feet where we tried to, and the Jeep caught fire. And the 3 guys were in the Jeep. And we tried to turn, him and I tried to lift the Jeep up, but we couldn't, we got burnt. So we ended up in the hospital. That was probably the worst part of it.
During the operation known as the Colmar Pocket, Ralph and his unit were lucky to find a building intact enough to set up a communications center. Here, Ralph experienced a very interesting event.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, I swore I heard a baby crying. And things were pretty rough, so the officer of the day, I called him and told him I heard a baby crying. He said, maybe you need to take a rest because the guy's cracked up, right? I said, no, I'm okay. So they went down cellar with guns drawn, and they said I wasn't allowed to leave the switchboard, so I had to stay there. And there was 19 people down there and 2 infants. They said, don't shoot us, you know. We're French, don't shoot us, right? So we didn't. Well, they didn't know that the Americans had taken over yet. They went in the cellar, and I don't know how long they were in there. They could have been in there for a week, and they were afraid to come up because they didn't know that the front line had already moved. So I was on I could have got probably court-martialed if you want to know the truth. But sometimes things happen and nobody knows. Everybody keeps their mouth shut, right? So it gets on the phone and it gets the kitchen up. And it gets the medics up, right? All we had was dry food. We had dried eggs, dried milk, but they made the milk and they give that to the kids, little babies, they're like a year old, right? And then we'd give her, and then we made the eggs. We made the eggs up for the adults and things, and then we took them to the medical vehicle. All it was, we only had one vehicle. It was 19 people.
Throughout his time in the war, Ralph experienced many difficulties, just like every man serving. At one point, Ralph's location was in the middle of a hedgerow in a 6x6 hole in the ground covered by tree branches. He was worried there because the telephone wires coming from gun locations and headquarters seemed like a dead giveaway to the Germans. In an interview with the FDR Museum, Ralph said, "I guess I did more praying in that hole in the ground than any other place ever. Someone must have been listening." Other soldiers weren't as lucky as Ralph.
In Germany, there's no bushes. The reason there's no bushes because they cut all the bushes down and they burn them in their stove to keep warm. So you could see for 500 feet through the woods, right? And you've seen these bodies. Sometimes the arms would be laying there. But one thing, it was good. It almost snowed every night, and it covered up the blood. And the guys were saying, "That's terrible. Why don't we stop?" We couldn't stop and help them. We had a mission of our own, and the medics were knocking themselves out. We had our job to do, and it wasn't to pick up bodies. It was to blow up bridges. Actually, if you weren't able to walk, nobody helped you, because the ones that walked, that did have some little life and seriously hurt, they might live. It was more important to take care of them, that they might live. And I said to the guys, I was looking out, I said to him, "Just leave them alone. They paid their price. Just leave them alone." I said, "They're not cold anymore. They're not hungry. They're not homesick, right?" I said, "Leave them alone." And that's exactly the way I felt. They had no more pain. And I really wanted that myself. You know, there's no such thing as cowards. There was exhaustion, combat exhaustion, right? Absolutely, you just break down. You can't do nothing more. And the last bit of advice that we were given before we boarded the ship was, the only way, just think about it, the only way you're coming back alone is if you win the war, which meant you're there until you're either dead or you win the war.
After the Germans surrendered, Ralph was transferred to the 7th Army headquarters in Heidelberg, Germany, where he was a clerk typist that helped get Allied prisoners back to their respective countries.
When the war was over, I was in Heidelberg, all right? It wasn't as big a celebration that the war was over as it was that we were going home. This is not right. It's not cool. He was I think, a 4-star general. There was a bigger celebration in Heidelberg when Patton died than there was when the war was over. Now, that seems cool, but you have to remember, those guys just got off the front line. They saw 10 tanks go through a hedgerow, and all the time, he knew that there was 20 German tanks there, and their tanks were far superior to ours. All I saw when they went through that hedgerow was 10 tanks burning up and 50 guys in them.
Military leaders often had to make difficult decisions during the war. A great amount of controversy surrounded the justification of Patton's ambitious and rapid offensives.
Patton had told the 3 guns to stay there and blow out the other bridge, right? He had ordered the second lieutenant to order us to stay there and blow out the railroad bridge. And we told him, "We can't, these guns are hot, we can't stay here. We have to get out of there, they know where we are." Well, they knew where we were, and they blew the B battery gun up. 21 guys went up in the air, body parts all over the place, right? I never did see that second lieutenant after that. I was in them, we never saw him. And I know what happened to him, and so did everybody else know what happened to him. You know, one of his own men shot him. We'd already been on the guns for 2 months, firing every other day. We knew what to do and what not to do. He didn't. He just came from the United States. He was what they call, you'll probably hear this, a 90-day wonder. They were sergeants here in the States, and they sent him to school for 90 days, right, 3 months, to order tank battalions, artillery battalions, and infantry battalions. Those battalions has been there for 2-3 years. They know what to do. They're PFCs. They're the ones that knows how to do. They're out there fighting it. Those are things that I think people should know of what really happens in combat, and not necessarily what's in the history books. And I got all kinds. They're all about the Battle of Bulge. All those books there. All of the books there. I got books all over the place. You know, there's not a word about 90-day wonders. Not a word about any of that stuff in any of them.
Of the 6,000 men that were on the English troop carrier with Ralph, only 1,200 came back after the war.
500,000 guys died. And I would say 90% of them was 18 years old. Hadn't seen anything yet of the world. I don't want to happen is don't forget the guys that didn't make it. Don't forget them. I'm not a religious nut, but I do think there's things up there that we should consider. If there was 100 guys in a unit and only 2 of them come back from the unit, there was a reason. And I was one of them come back. How come when I was sitting in that Jeep where I was, behind the driver, and if I was sitting in the same Jeep with him, I wouldn't have been here today, all right? Or in the back on the other side. There was a reason why I got in back of the driver, is so I could be here today. Now, that might sound crazy to you, but that's the way I believe.
Despite all of the difficulties, the brave soldiers like Ralph knew they had a duty to protect the United States, which is what kept them motivated throughout the war.
You were in training to kill, and that's basically what you did. And everything else was second. So you didn't worry about stripes. All you wanted to do was get home. But more than wanting to get home, believe it or not, you didn't want them coming to your house. I didn't want the German army in Hyde Park, New York. And if we hadn't won the war, they would. So that's what you were thinking of. You were thinking of your family more than you were yourself. And I'll tell you why you figured that way. Because you're going to be dead tomorrow anyway. That's why you felt that way, right? You have to believe you're going to be dead tomorrow because as the train went through or the trucks went through and you're moving from one side to another, there's thousands of bodies. You have to believe you're next. See, I blabbed for an hour.
Oh, that's okay.
See, that's what happens. There's so much to say, and there's so much to say.